Copyright disclaimer. Under Title 17 U.S.C. Section 107, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing non-profit, educational, or personal use. Tips the balance in favor of fair use. Okay, you guys, I feel this is very important, extremely so, to know what the definition of human trafficking is as per U.S. Department of State, allegedly. And this is dated January 20th, 2025. If anyone wants to download the PDF, you can do that. And here we go. Trafficking in persons and human trafficking are umbrella terms often used interchangeably to refer to a crime whereby traffickers exploit and profit at the expense of adults or children by compelling them to perform labor. Or engage in commercial sex. When a person younger than 18 is used to perform a commercial sex act, it is a crime regardless of whether there is any force, fraud, or coercion involved. Listen to this, you guys. When a person younger than 18 is used to perform a commercial sex act, it is a crime regardless of whether there is any force, fraud, or coercion involved. Amazing. The United States recognizes two primary forms of trafficking in persons: forced labor and sex trafficking. The basic meaning of these forms of human trafficking and some unique characteristics of each are set forth below, followed by several key principles and concepts that relate to all forms of human trafficking. More than 180 nations have ratified or acceded to the UN Protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, the UN Dept Protocol, which defines trafficking in persons and contains obligations to prevent and combat the crime. The United States TVPA and the UN Dept Protocol contain similar definitions of human trafficking. The elements of both definitions can be described using a three-element framework focused on the trafficker's 1. Acts, 2. Means, and 3. Purpose. This is very important. All three elements are essential to form a human trafficking violation. So again, 1. Acts, 2. Means, and 3. Purpose. All written into the LRH policies, by the way. But what do I know? Just a redhead from the Midwest. Ex-Army, too. Forced labor. How many accounts have we heard about this? Forced labor, sometimes also referred to as labor trafficking, encompasses the range of activities involved when a person uses force, fraud, or coercion to exploit the labor or services of another person. Like a child. Written into the LRH policies, by the way. Department of Justice, State Department. The acts element of forced labor is met when the trafficker recruits, like all the recruitment that's being done on Facebook, being done through the Youth for Human Rights, being done in elementary schools, being done at Narconon, being done at the, what is it called, the Commission for Human Rights, the CCHR. How about that? all written into policies. The means element of forced labor includes a trafficker's use of force, like a policy, like when Wally Hanks made that young boy read the policy while he was beating the crap out of him, like that. Fraud, like LRH being wanted in France for actually being a fraud, like that. Or coercion. Well, every single one of LRH policies in Scientology, every one of them is coercion. Facts. The coercive scheme can include threats of force, like freeloaders' debt, ethics handlings, making amends, writing KRs on people, blackmailing people to include children, with outing their private thoughts, especially regarding sex. The coercive scheme can include threats of force, debt manipulation, withholding of pay. Yeah, how many stories have we heard about child Scientologists that had their volunteer pay withheld? There we go. Confiscation of identity documents. How many times have we heard about the children that had their passports locked up? I don't know how many live in-person accounts the State Department or the Department of Justice needs to do something. Psychological coercion. That's every single LRH policy in Scientology. Interbulation, being banky, ethics handlings, making amends. Those are the ones I can think of right now. Reputational harm, like all of the hate websites that are on the web regarding ex-Scientologists. Manipulation of the use of addictive substances. Threats to other people. Well, Scientology, that's them all day, every day. Or other forms of coercion. And again, this is very, very good to know. I'm going to start writing notes on this. I'm going to upload the PDF. The purpose element focuses on the perpetrators, Scientologists, goal to exploit a person's labor or services, especially child labor. There's no limit on the location or type of industry. Traffickers can commit the crime in any sector or setting, whether legal or illicit, including but not limited to agricultural fields, factories, restaurants. The JWs are really good at having child laborers in the restaurants. But then, of course, Scientologists in Scientology, their whole kitchen staff are children. I thought it was illegal, but what do I know? Hotels, you guys know. Just listen to Serge Delmar. Massage parlors. Or how about when children have to massage grown adults and they call them touch assists, where money is exchanged for the so-called auditing that these grown adults pay for, and the children are massaging the adults under the guise of touch assists? Is that freedom of religion? Or is that the purpose of labor trafficking? Inquiring MF minds want to know. Retail stores, fishing vessels, or how about all their fake Navy ships where they have the children harbored? against their will. Mines, private homes. Oh, also, let's bring into the purpose of labor trafficking all the children that are being schooled, which I don't know the regulations of homeschooling, but they create these schools where these Scientology children aren't even, I don't even know if they're all documented, to be really honest with you. Which I also thought that was against the law, but you know. Or drug trafficking operations. Well, I didn't know I was going to break this one down so much. We already know LRH's son snitched on his father, who was 100% involved in drug trafficking of cocaine from South America to America. Isn't that wonderful? While he's telling all his, I say in quotations, adherents, that they're not allowed to do drugs. And he's high as a kite while he's telling everyone this. All three elements are essential to constitute the crime of forced labor. I'm going to be taking some major notes on this one. There are certain types of forced labor that are frequently distinguished for emphasis, or because they are widespread. Oh, you guys know. Scientology's entire domestic staff are children. You know, like Rinder. Rinder must have had little children, you know, ironing his clothes and laundering his clothes. But he was trying to help people, wasn't he? Please. Domestic servitude is a form of forced labor in which the trafficker, you know, like the Scientologists, require a victim like a child. Like a child, that's what they do. They use the children. They call them adults in small bodies. To perform work in a private residence. How many times have we heard of these Scientologists that were children, and it's still going on, that were private, the children were private servants to these adults. Adult Scientologists. I don't know how many witness accounts we need. 100, 200, 300, 500, 1,000? Domestic workers are often isolated and may work alone in a house or a hotel. Jenna Miscavige talked about working in one of the hotels in Florida. I believe Lara FM had spoken about that as well. Because, you know, kids are really good for cleaning up dirty hotels for free. Because they're adults in small bodies. Their employer often controls their access to food. You know, like the adult Scientologists that are whining and crying like frickin' wimpy babies all day long. Controls their access to food, transportation, and housing. What happens in a private residence is hidden from the world, including from law enforcement. Yeah, like LAPD doesn't know, you guys, please. Criminal LAPD. And labor inspectors. When is the last time a labor inspector was on Scientology grounds? Inquiring minds want to know. Resulting in barriers to victim identification. Foreign domestic workers are particularly vulnerable. Can we say R1 visa fraud? Oh, that's another crime, but you know. Foreign domestic workers are particularly vulnerable to abuse due to language and cultural barriers, as well as lack of community ties. Can I just bring up how many child Scientologists have spoken out about the foreign, you know, from various countries, little children, toddlers, sometimes 2 and 3 years old, just dropped off at the Florida hotels or the Celebrity Center. made to do domestic work and go to the muster, and they didn't even speak English. How cruel is that? Sickening. Anyone try to do that in front of me, you guys know what's going to happen. I'll go out like a freaking champion. Sure will. You guys think I wouldn't? Some perpetrators, like Scientologists, use these type of conditions as part of their coercive schemes to compel the labor of domestic workers, like children, with little risk of detection. Or people that just put their head in the sand and abdicate any duties that they're supposed to do. Forced child labor. The term forced child labor describes forced labor schemes in which traffickers compel children to work. Oh, well, FBI, Department of Justice, just go look at the Scientology website where it talks about why children need to be productive. Just look at the LRH Scientology policies. The child labor is written right into their policies, which I thought was against the law, but, what do I know? Traffickers often target children because they are more vulnerable. Well, you guys know, we've talked about that at length. Including they recruit some minors in Narconon as well. Can you get more vulnerable? It's something that the dark occultists do. They're really good at harvesting vulnerable children or adults. They're very good at it, the dark occultists. It's a fact. Here we go. Although some children may legally engage in certain forms of work, forcing or coercing children to work remains illegal. Does it now? Do tell. Do tell. We got all these child laborers in Scientology. And honestly, it's not just Scientology. It's the JWs do it. The Mormons do it. It's also, there are a lot of children in America that are not documented, that are working as domestic servants. It's a fact. Facts. Forms of slavery or slavery-like practices, including the sale of children. Including the sale of children. Have you guys ever heard of child auctions? I'm not going to go into it. Yeah, it exists. You'll cry until the last day of your life if you knew everything that was going on. I know a lot. Forced or compulsory child labor and debt bondage. You guys have talked about that. The debt bondage has been going on for thousands of years. It's the first thing people do. In fact, our country, and it's not just America, but we're really good for it. Look around. Everyone's in debt. It's on purpose to keep you weak. And debt bondage and serfdom of children continue to exist despite legal prohibitions and widespread condemnation. Some indicators of forced labor of a child include situations in which the child appears to be in the custody. There we go. Oh, I knew they were going to do this. But I talk about the guardianship, you guys. In the custody of a non-family member and the child's work financially benefits someone outside the child's family. Or the denial of food, rest, or schooling to a child who is working. That's also called neglect. Sex trafficking. Sex trafficking encompasses the range of activities involved when a trafficker uses force, fraud, or coercion, sounds like the LAPD, to compel another person to engage in a commercial sex act, like a child, or causes a child to engage in a commercial sex act. You know, like the R word, sexual battery. The crime of sex trafficking is also understood through the acts, means, and purpose framework. All three elements are required to establish a sex trafficking crime, except in the case of child sex trafficking, where the means are irrelevant. The acts element of sex trafficking is met when a trafficker, you know, like Scientology, recruits, harbors, transports, provides, obtains, patronizes, or solicits another person to engage in commercial sex. You guys remember when Wally Hanks was getting the young girls, minors, to engage in sex acts? Like that. Like what Wally Hanks was doing. You guys think he's the only one? Come on. Poor vulnerable kids. Sick. The means element of sex trafficking occurs when a trafficker uses force, fraud, or coercion. Sound like Scientology? Coercion in the case of sex trafficking includes the broad array of means included in the forced labor definition. These can include threats of serious harm, psychological harm, like ethics handlings, reputational harm, like threatening to tell everyone in the organization, threats to others, like their family members, or can we say disconnection, and debt manipulation, like freeloader debt, chase wave anyone? The purpose element is a commercial sex act. Sex trafficking can take place in private homes, massage parlors, or like auditing rooms. Let's just add auditing rooms. I'm adding that because that would count. Hotels, all Scientology's hotels. It's where the children are being abused. Or brothels, among other locations, as well as on the internet. Isn't it interesting we only have one paragraph on child sex trafficking? Go check out John Wedger, you guys. Please do. He's got a lot of old videos up there. He knew what was up. In cases where an individual engages in any, like an adult, in any of the specified acts with a child, pedophiles, under the age of 18. Under the age of 18, Scientology, wake up! The means element is irrelevant regardless of whether evidence of force, fraud, or coercion exists. Let me repeat that. The means element is irrelevant, Scientology, regardless of whether evidence of force, fraud, or coercion exists. Davey Miscavige. What's the other guy's name? Tommy. Kendrick Moxon. The use of children in commercial sex is prohibited by law in the United States and most countries around the world. Is it now? If you guys know, you know. Key principles and concepts. These key principles and concepts relate to all forms of trafficking in persons, including forced labor and sex trafficking. Okay, most importantly here, consent. Human trafficking can take place even if the victim, like a child, initially consented to providing labor, services, or commercial sex acts. The analysis is primarily focused on the trafficker's conduct and not that of the victim. A trafficker can target a victim after a victim applies for a job or migrates to earn a living. The trafficker's exploitative scheme is what matters, not a victim's prior consent or ability to meaningfully consent thereafter. Likewise, in a sex trafficking case, an adult victim's initial willingness to engage in commercial sex acts with a child is not relevant where a perpetrator subsequently uses force, fraud, or coercion to exploit the victim and cause them to continue engaging in the same acts. In the case of child sex trafficking, the consent of the victim, child, is never relevant, as a child cannot legally consent to commercial sex. Let me read that again for the idiots that don't get it. Child cannot legally consent to commercial sex. Do you guys see why Scientology likes to get them all married off? Handler, anyone? It's a fact. Movement. Neither U.S. law nor international law requires that a trafficker or victim move across a border. Let's read this again. Neither U.S. law nor international law requires that a trafficker or victim move across a border for a human trafficking offense to take place. Trafficking in persons is a crime of exploitation and coercion, and not movement. Traffickers can use schemes that take victims hundreds of miles away from their homes, or exploit them in the same neighborhoods where they were born. Oh boy, debt bondage. They all do this. All of them. Debt bondage is focused on human trafficking crimes in which the trafficker's primary means of coercion is debt manipulation. Doesn't it ring a bell with you guys that so many people in the United States are in debt? It's not exactly the same, but I'm just bringing that up. U.S. law prohibits perpetrators from using debts as part of their scheme, plan, or pattern, like freeloaders' debt, to compel a person to work or engage in commercial sex. Traffickers target some individuals with an initial debt assumed willingly as a condition of future employment, while in certain countries, traffickers tell individuals they inherited the debt from relatives. Isn't that great, you guys? Isn't that wonderful? Traffickers can also manipulate debts after the economic relationship begins by withholding earnings or forcing the victim to assume debts for expenses like food, housing, or transportation. Aren't the children in Scientology expected to pay for their own food, housing? That's what I've understood. Maybe not every single Scientology family, but in the Sea Org, as a staff member, those children are required to pay for everything. Read Jenna Miscavige's book. I think, what was it called? Beyond Belief, I think. When traffickers use debts as a means to compel labor or commercial sex, they have committed a crime. No way. You guys, if you understand me and what's going on in the world, that's why I'm sarcastic. The non-punishment principle. A victim-centered and trauma-informed approach is key to successful anti-trafficking efforts. A central tenet to such an approach is that victims of trafficking should not be inappropriately penalized solely for unlawful acts they committed as a direct result of being trafficked. What I understand that to be is, like, let's say if a child was sex trafficked and they committed crimes under duress, they're not guilty because they were under duress or coercion. Doesn't go for all these Scientologists doing this stuff. Adults. Effective implementation of the non-punishment principle, as it is increasingly referred to, not only requires recognizing and embracing the principle in regional and national laws, but also increasing proactive victim identification. State-sponsored human trafficking. While the TVPA and UN Dept protocol call on governments to proactively address trafficking crimes, some governments are part of the problem. No way. You don't say. Go listen to some of the stories at YouTube Conquer Soul about all the trafficking Diddy was doing. And interestingly enough, I guess he was the only one. And it's all the dark occult stuff. If you can't handle it, don't go there. Some governments are part of the problem, directly compelling their citizens into sexual slavery or forced labor schemes. From forced labor in local or national public work projects, military operations, and economically important sectors, or as part of government-funded projects or missions abroad, officials use their power to exploit their nationals. Surprise, surprise. It's all narcissism. It's all psychopaths. To extract this work, governments coerce by threatening the withdrawal of public benefits, withholding salaries. That's the blackmail. Failing to adhere to limits on national service, manipulating the lack of legal status of stateless individuals and members of minority groups. Big surprise. Threatening to punish family members, or conditioning services or freedom of movement on labor or sex. Doesn't that remind you the same as when a young child is being sexually abused at home? The threats that they get? I'm talking about the incestual child sex abuse. In 2019, Congress amended the TPVA to acknowledge that governments can also act as traffickers, referring specifically to a government policy or pattern. How about that, you guys? A policy. Listen to that one. I'm going to read that again. Government policy or pattern of human trafficking. Trafficking in government-funded programs. LAPD come to mind? Forced labor in government-affiliated medical services or other sectors. Sexual slavery in government camps. I wonder what government camps they're talking about. Like the Katrina, when the Katrina happened? Or the employment or recruitment of child soldiers. Well, so far I don't think we do that here, but I would say this. Go look at all these military schools they put the little ones in. It's sick. It's sick. It is beyond sick. I believe we have some here in America. Unlawful recruitment or use of child soldiers. Another manifestation of human trafficking occurs when government forces or any non-state armed group unlawfully recruits or uses children through force, fraud, or coercion as soldiers or for labor or services in conflict situations. Children are also used as sex slaves. Imagine the consciousness of these demon-infested scumbags to do this to children. Sexual slavery, as referred to here, occurs when armed groups force or coerce children to marry. Listen to that, you guys. Force children to marry. We know that's going on all throughout the world. Or to be raped by commanders or combatants. I'm just shaking my head. Both male and female children are often sexually abused or exploited by members of armed groups and suffer the same types of devastating physical and psychological consequences associated with sex trafficking. Yeah, that's what multiple R-ing of children does to the child. Accountability in supply chains. Forced labor is well documented in the private economy, particularly in agriculture. Yeah, I just, right off the top of my head, have you guys ever heard about how they put children in those places to butcher cows? It's awful. Usually undocumented Mexican children or children from the various either South American or Mexican states. It's atrocious. Fishing, manufacturing, construction, and domestic work. Scientology, it's all about domestic work. And they do construction. They also have the children doing construction and manufacturing, like their propaganda CDs and DVDs and all of it. But no sector is immune. You mean like religion? Department of Justice? Is that what you mean? Department of Justice, you must mean religions. Or in some cases, cults. Most well known is the hospitality industry, but the crime also occurs in connection with extractive industries where activities are often remote and lack meaningful government presence. That sounds like a way for them to wiggle out of responsibility. That's what I think. I mean, look at all that's going on right now, not just Scientology. It must be a coincidence, right? Wait a minute here. Where was I? Governments should hold all entities, including businesses, accountable for human trafficking. I say including religions, fake or real. In some countries, the law provides for corporate accountability in both the civil and criminal justice systems. U.S. law provides such liability for any legal person, like a child, including a business that benefits financially from its involvement in a human trafficking scheme, provided that the business knew or should have known of the scheme. So, you guys, I will leave a link in the description box. Like and subscribe if you choose. Otherwise, have an amazing day or night, wherever you are. Peace.